With Final Fantasy XVI, Square Enix has continued to experiment with and dramatically depart from their flagship IP's traditional roots. At the same time, it is a game that feels closer to those classic roots than the series has been for some time. That experimentation, over the course of many mainline games and spin-offs, has had variable degrees of success that seem to have finally culminated with the splashiest Final Fantasy to date. To say that Final Fantasy XVI feels like the offspring between Final Fantasy and Devil May Cry will give you a clear indication as to what Square Enix has cooked up with this one. Now, 2 years after its initial PS5 launch, Xbox Series owners can join in on the fray. Final Fantasy XVI takes place on the continent of Valisthea, a world on the brink of an environmental disaster that pushes the world's nations into resource-driven conflicts. Players are dropped into the shoes of Clive Rossfield, a young lord whose empire is destroyed overnight and his younger brother murdered. Clive embarks on a journey of vengeance to find his brother's killer, a journey that will reveal mysteries about himself, while plunging the world deeper into political conflict. Final Fantasy XVI is the very definition of an action RPG. This is a big, bold and splashy visual extravaganza, much like a summer blockbuster movie that straddles the line between hack and slash and JRPG. Those expecting a return to traditional mechanics will be disappointed, as the RPG elements are stripped back even further when compared to the previous entries in the series. The main essence of an RPG still remains, with plenty of locations to explore and angsty moral dilemmas to chew on. There are enough NPCs to speak to flesh out the world, and there's a lengthy, complicated story that veers from vengeance to world saving. The story is certainly one of the game's strongest aspects, and benefits from some stellar voice acting that raises the bar for the series. The story and the setting are where the game does hark back to its roots. The ubiquitous crystals are here, along with a medieval fantasy setting reminiscent of the original Hexology, and the story that veers between personal and political. Gone, though, are the tons of items to manage in your inventory, replaced by a moderate amount of consumables that are hot-linked for combat. Instead, copious amounts of crafting materials take the space normally reserved for endless inventory glut. The amount of gear you can equip has also been scaled back, limiting you to a weapon and some accessories that change up your effectiveness in combat significantly. Gone, too, is an overworld to run around in, replaced by a world map that lets you fast travel between locations. The locations themselves are large enough to allow for exploration on the back of a chocobo, but can't hide the game's overall linearity. In its place are systems more at home in action games. There are skill trees to purchase and upgrade new abilities, while combat loadouts play a significant role towards the endgame. Clive's combat abilities allow for the use of fast sword strikes that can be charged up for heavy blows. The use of magical abilities are based on the elements. There's a dodge that can allow you to counterattack if done quickly enough, and a quick dash that's close to a classic teleport move. Party members help out in combat as well, which allows you to chain combos with them or use your trusty hound, Torgal, to launch enemies into the air for some punishing aerial combos. Instead of learning traditional FF spells, Clive can harness Icon abilities. Icon and Final Fantasy XVI are the classic summon spells, only this time Bahamut and his ilk play much larger roles in the game, literally. Clive can use the abilities of Ifrit, Phoenix, or whichever Icon you've beaten to spice up combat significantly, flowing between hectic sword strikes into Icon-specific abilities, such as launching walls of flame across the ground, or multiple wind-based slashing attacks that look and feel stupendous when used in an air juggle. The big selling point for Final Fantasy XVI are the Icon fights, in which you either transform into one yourself, or take on one of them in a blistering duel pyrotechnic spectacle that's right up there with any modern high-octane kaiju fight. As good-looking as Final Fantasy XVI is, it's these moments that are truly a sight to behold in the game's showcase. Make no mistake, normal combat is blisteringly fast and flashy, with enough special effects and fireballs thrown around to trigger an epileptic fit, but it pales in comparison to the Icon battles that are on par with any modern Hollywood blockbuster. From Crisis Core to the Final Fantasy VII Remake, It's a testament to how much Square Enix have learnt over the years that I can call Final Fantasy XVI's combat thrilling. All that said, Final Fantasy XVI isn't a perfect game. The pacing can be inconsistent in terms of how much is doled out for you to tackle. The bulk of the game favours a linear thrust to keep the story flowing, with the occasional side quest doled out to offer a break and help with the world building. However, towards the game's climax, you're suddenly inundated with a list of people to help out. I'm all for more content, but these optional quests could have been better sprinkled throughout the game's runtime to break up that corridor feeling that the main story evokes. Combat-wise, the game also favours bullet sponge enemies and bosses, which makes many fights last far longer than they should. There's a stagger mechanic at play that lets you stun an enemy for a short duration once you've broken its stagger bar. The further into the game you get, the more reliant you become on exploiting this mechanic to deal significant amounts of damage. Towards the endgame, it's essential to set up your characters to quickly break stagger bars and keep the enemies in a stun-locked state. This overrides a lot of the thrill with the game's heavily DMC-inspired combat, as it becomes less about skillfully chaining attacks and more about triggering staggers to shave those massive health bars down. As with the PS5 version of the game, the Xbox Series X version comes with two graphics modes, quality and performance. Quality favours visual fidelity with a 30 frames per second frame rate, while performance favours a 60 frames per second frame rate at the expense of visuals. Both modes on the Series X ran well, and I never noticed performance issues regardless of which mode I played on. Performance mode feels silky smooth, but that does come at a noticeable visual cost. It runs at a much lower resolution that makes the visuals seem a little blurry and less defined. And with the game so built on visual spectacle as this one, a lower resolution isn't the way you should have to experience it. Quality mode still has visual issues if you look closely enough, such as shimmering when the characters move, but the performance is still rock solid and fast enough that I never felt as though the 30 frames per second cap was limiting me in any way. The last thing to touch on is that the Complete Edition of Final Fantasy XVI comes with the two expansions, Echoes of the Fallen and The Rising Tide. Both add even more goodness to an already stacked game, and with the Complete Edition installed, you'll be able to access them at key points during the main campaign. So, elevated by an intensely fun battle system and stunning voice acting, Final Fantasy XVI is easily one of the best mainline games in the series in recent years. It manages to capture the spirit of the original games with a strong story and great characters, while the spectacular boss battles and pyrotechnic visuals are icing on a particularly wonderful action RPG cake.
If you've got this far, please consider giving the video a like and maybe subscribing to our channel, as it helps us grow.